From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Free Expression with Jerry Baker.
Hello and welcome to Free Expression from the Wall Street Journal. I'm Jerry Baker, editor-at-large of the Journal. If you're not already a subscriber to Free Expression, please do sign up wherever you do your podcast listening. This week, is Joe Biden out of the woods yet? Immediately after his catastrophic debate performance against Donald Trump 2 weeks ago, it looked as though demands from some Democrats that President Biden should step aside as their nominee for this year's election would prevail, with polls indicating the president's already faltering chances of winning another term slipping further. A handful of members of Congress went public with calls for the president to step down. Many more whispered anonymously to reporters and to people like me that Biden had to go. And for a while it seemed that the pressure might be enough to break the dam. But Biden and his campaign fought back to hold back the tide. Last Friday, in a hastily arranged interview with ABC News, he said he would never willingly quit. All weekend, his teams deployed appeals to quell the panic, with aides calling members of Congress to cool it. And on Monday, Biden issued a letter to Democrats insisting he would stay on and reminding them in not so subtle terms how difficult it would be for them to remove him against his will, given that he'd already won the party's primary contest and was the de facto nominee ahead of next month's convention. This seemed to do the trick, at least for a while. But what was described as a very intense congressional gathering on Tuesday, some members continued to express doubts, but the consensus was not to try to push him out. Well, that was Tuesday. On Wednesday, just before we recorded this podcast, Nancy Pelosi, the former speaker, seemed to suggest in an interview on MSNBC that Biden should reconsider his decision to press on. Later, George Clooney, of all people, actor and munificent Democratic donor, as well as a friend of the president and a friend of former President Barack Obama, called for Biden to step down. So where does this all end? Well, with me to discuss this week, I'm pleased to be joined by John Fetterman, Democratic senator from Pennsylvania. Senator Fetterman has been a vocal supporter of the president since the debate. Does he think Joe Biden has now turned back the tide, or could there still be more to come? Senator John Fetterman joins me now. Senator, thanks very much for joining Free Expression.
No, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Senator, you've been a fierce defender, a vocal defender of President Biden since that disappointing debate performance for him 2 weeks ago, and you've been a fierce critic of those calling for him to stand down. Now, in the last 24 hours or so, again, despite the White House's efforts and your own support, there seem to be more calls for him to stand down. Nancy Pelosi this morning seemed to suggest maybe he should reconsider his decision. Other senators have been giving similar signals. Is the tide turning against him, do you think?
I'd like to remind that the vast majority of Democrats support the president. And really, the one Democrat that supports Joe Biden is Joe Biden. And he's been very clear. I'm staying in this. I'm the candidate. I'm going to be on the ballot in November, and I'm going to win this. And I think every other Democrat should be on that exact same page. Everyone's entitled to their own views, but it's this whole process at this point in conversation is only really most helpful to Donald Trump and anyone who wants Donald Trump to win, because as long as we keep having this kinds of argument, it's just not, I don't think that's helpful when we really should be most focusing on the kind of risk that a second and third term of the Trump could be, and instead of rehashing a rough debate, coming up on 2 weeks ago.
So somebody else, not a politician, but a prominent political figure in some ways, George Clooney, wrote a piece in the New York Times today. Again, we're recording this on Wednesday, saying that the Joe Biden that he hosted a fundraiser for just a couple of weeks ago, where he raised $28 million, was not the Joe Biden that he'd known over the last few years. And in fact, was very much the Joe Biden that he'd seen in that debate performance. Do you agree? Do you think Joe Biden is, as he said, and as others have said, just doesn't have the faculties, the cognitive abilities to be able to do another 4 years as president?
I could never be a movie star, I'm a big fan of his work, and in that situation, I just disagree with that assessment on that. Thank you for raising Democratic kinds of candidates, but that's just not. I don't agree with that view at all, and I actually very I'm not sure what that accomplishes, but he's entitled to his view.
Biden campaign is sending their top campaign officials, I think, to the Hill, I think tomorrow, to talk to senators like yourselves and others. What are you going to be there? What do you expect to hear from them?
I don't really know. All I'm doing is I'm showing up with brass knuckles, and I'm going to be very much front and center, and I'm going to be all about Joe Biden. Now, there'll probably be different kinds of opinions, but I'm not really sure why we not all on that same page and all believe that we should be united to beat Trump. And we all can agree we have a great president, and we can all agree that he didn't have a great debate. So we should have moved on by now. And Joe Biden won the primary. He's a great president, and I'm proud to stand with him. And I believe we should do that. We should be proud to stand with him. In a very united and front and center kinds of that. This kinds of conversation at some point, for every day that it continues, the only thing it seems to make that better or stronger, that's Trump.
But you do understand, surely, that you say the president is absolutely up and capable for another 4 years. But a lot of people don't think that. And it's not just the debates. They've seen him in close quarters. They've seen him in small settings.
I was on Air Force One. I've been with him from what, 8 or 9 in the morning until like 5 o'clock. And he was great. He was normal. And that's the thing. So I can speak to that. And I want to be clear. And again, I'm talking to you at the Journal. I've interviewed with you before, and I've agreed with him in Israel sometimes, or maybe even on the border.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't change the fact that he's a great president.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I didn't believe Joe Biden was up to that, I wouldn't be saying these things publicly. That's for sure. I would have reached out in private, or I wouldn't have said anything about it. But I wouldn't be here right now if I even thought that he wasn't ready for that. But he is, and that's why I'm front and center of all that. And quite frankly, I think it should be pretty crowded, in that space right now, to be an enthusiastic all in on Joe Biden and putting aside, any of your concerns that really are real concerns to be getting and be united against Trump.
One thing that you're hearing that seems to be alarming a number of Democrats is that polling, especially polling since the debate, is going against Biden, but going maybe against them in some key swing districts too. You're in Pennsylvania. There was a poll actually just, I think, this week that showed Trump with a big lead in Pennsylvania. What's your sense? Are you seeing slippage in the polls either in Pennsylvania or elsewhere for Joe Biden?
I don't recall any Republicans freaking out, or Fox News or other of those kinds of outlets freaking out, when Trump was convicted of 30, what was it, 33 or 30 charges? And they weren't like, oh no, his poll, slipped. No, I've been saying this. Can't we learn something from the Republicans? When the hits the fan, they surround him and support him, and they're proud to stand with him. And when something happens with Democrats, we panic and we, hand wring, and we, talk about, what kind of self-care do I need? It's just, we got to just like tough it up. And it's like, we're all in a foxhole here. And I don't think if you're in a foxhole, panicking doesn't help.
So it does sound as though from that answer that you are maybe suggesting that maybe, you have seen a bit of slippage in the polls, but Democrats should just suck it up and get on with it because he's the candidate.
No, but what I'm saying is that that's the way things happen. It's a very human kind of pursuit here, running. I know what it's like. I had a rough debate, and a lot of people may have wrote me off or said, and I know they said a lot of terrible things about me. And I tried to maintain that I got this, and I am not the sum total of a rough debate. And the polls said that Oz was going to win by a couple points. In fact, 538, the granddaddy of aggregator, they said that I think he had a 65% chance of winning, and we won by 5 points. And so it's like, and Joe Biden had my back, and I'm absolutely going to have his back.
I mean, but respectfully, Senator, you had a very serious medical episode, but mercifully, you have been improving all the time since that happened. As anybody can see, whatever is ailing Joe Biden is not like that, is it? Without being delicate about it, I mean, he's an old man who's aging, as old men do. We've seen it.
I'm not saying he's going to go Benjamin Button kind of. I'm not saying that's going to happen. But what I am saying, though, it's like he had a bad night, and it was an off night, and he's been fantastic through the whole NATO meetings. And again, he had a great day with me. I witnessed it. I lived that with him so in Pennsylvania, and people love him in Pennsylvania. And whether there was a debate or not, it was going to be close, 100%. And let me predict. I don't know when this. I don't know when this is going to be released, but watch the size of the crowd in Butler for Trump. It's going to be big.
Yeah,
he's popular,
yeah.
and he has a strong connection in Pennsylvania. But Joe Biden beat him in 2020, and it's going to be that same thing. This is the same conversation that we've had in 3 cycles now. And finally, this is going to end, or if theoretically, perhaps, if Trump wins, then he's going to be working on his 3rd term.
You said something very interesting there, Senator. You said that he stood by you when you were having that hard time in your Senate race in Pennsylvania, and you're going to stand by him. Am I right, maybe just interpreting that perhaps as a very commendable act of loyalty on your part? Perhaps you'll, as other people are falling away, maybe you'll be the last man standing with Joe Biden.
Well, I won't be, but if that's what it takes, well, then I'd be proud to be that. I don't think I won't be the last man standing in this, but my view isn't gonna change, and I think the Democratic Party, if we continue to attack our president and do these kinds of leaking and those other things, we run the risk of becoming the kind of party that deserves to lose.
So what do you think happens next, Senator? We're going to not clear about what's going to happen tomorrow with this campaign visit to the Hill. The president, as you say, is in the middle of the NATO summit right now. We've got the Republican convention coming up next week. Do you think this is just going to blow over? How long is this going to go on?
Well, I can't. Who knows? There are no experts here. But what I can guarantee that my views aren't going to change, and I'm going to be very enthusiastic, unapologetically, and front and center and proud to stand with the president.
And the vice president, too. I mean, some people have been critical of Biden for having picked a vice president who, according to the polls, she's less popular than Biden right now. But you think she's, in some ways, makes this particular problem for a lot of Democrats a lot worse because they're not sure that switching out the vice president for the president will make things any better. But you firmly believe she's a strong candidate, too?
I think she's a fantastic vice president. And if God forbid, that's the reason why we have a vice president. God forbid if something happens to the president. And, when I was lieutenant governor, and if anything happens to the governor, God forbid, but if anyone, and understandably, is incredibly excited to have Vice President Harris be the top of the ticket, I'm not sure what kind of voter would not want to vote for Joe Biden as Harris as the vice president, but would only vote unless there's Harris on the top and somebody else. Because a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Harris, and I do fundamentally believe that she could very much be president, but I don't think this is her time right now. And she's been clear she supports Joe Biden. And Joe Biden is very clear that he's going to take this through the convention, and we're going to be there in November.
Is a vote for Joe Biden in November a kind of a vote for Kamala Harris to take over from him sometime in the second term?
No, I don't. I'm not saying that. but all I'm saying is that Joe Biden and the Vice President Harris are a great ticket, and I don't care who Trump picks. I'm always going to support Joe Biden. Like that. That's what's so strange. Like I these two things are not alike. I don't just know who somebody was like, well, Trump, Biden, like Joe Biden, our nation is in a so much better place than we were 4 years ago. We would only be able to do what we're doing now. We'd have to be on Zoom kind of a thing. And, we were all hoarding toilet paper, and we had no idea how COVID's going to work out. And we would have thought that our economy would be crashed into a recession. And now we're the world's envy throughout all of this. Joe Biden has done a great job throughout all this. He's held every line. He has held every line. And I had a rough race, and it was incredibly difficult. So lives and is in the ultimate crucible, and he's been able to maintain that and has done a great job. And he deserves our support. And at a minimum, he certainly deserves all of this, cowardly leaking and that kinds of stuff. If you're a friend to the president, a real friend would talk privately, or they would maybe hold your tongue. But if you want to say, share your views, I guess you're entitled to that. But I think we should all be focusing on what we have, and that is a second term of Trump. And I'm excited to vote for Joe Biden. And if you're not excited to vote for Joe Biden, I can't believe somebody would want 4 more years after that's been like Donald Trump.
We're going to take a short break there. When we come back, I'll have more with Senator John Fetterman, Democrat of Pennsylvania. We're talking about President Biden and whether or not he still will be the Democratic nominee in November. Stay with us.
You're listening to Free Expression with Jerry Baker. Don't forget, you can listen to the latest episode anytime on your smart speaker. Just say, play the Opinion Free Expression podcast. Now, back to Jerry Baker.
Welcome back. I'm talking with John Fetterman, Democratic Senator from Pennsylvania. We're talking about President Biden and whether he'll still be the party's nominee in November. Your Senate colleague Michael Bennet from Colorado said this week, and I quote, Donald Trump is on track to win this election and maybe win it by a landslide and take with him the Senate and the House. So for me, this isn't a question about polling. It's not about politics. It's a moral question about the future of our country. If you think that Biden's going to win, why is someone like that so gloomy about the outcome if Biden stays on the ticket?
I really don't know. He's entitled to his view, and I'm entitled to say I don't agree with that, and I think you're wrong.
Just moving on, Senator, briefly, you've already in your first couple of years of your first term assembly established yourself as quite an independent actor and thinker, which of course we know you were when you were state official in Pennsylvania too. You've been very vocal on Israel, Palestine, very strongly supportive of Israel. A lot in your party don't seem to be so. And, we may see at the convention next month in Chicago, there's expectations of a lot of protests, both, actual protests, but also platform efforts and everything else. Is a second Biden administration supported by Democrats in Congress going to continue to support Israel in its war against Hamas?
Absolutely. I've been very clear. I would not support any ceasefire or any kind of permanent ceasefire unless Hamas is neutralized and allowed to be functional. And, how can you allow Hamas to be functional? How could you possibly rebuild Gaza if Hamas is still in power? Do you think they're going to use the monies the billions that it would take to rebuild Gaza? They're going to rebuild the tunnels. They're going to buy weapons. Very little of that's ever going to get through to rebuild Gaza. That's what they've done, and they've stolen aid already in the past. So I'm unapologetically all in on Israel through all that. And I've said this too, that only one side in this war now is concerned about and tries to minimize the death and the misery of civilians here in Gaza. And Sinwar is on the record saying they're all necessary sacrifices throughout all this. That's been all the plan. That's the way they planned that. And there is no spiritual connection between Hamas and average Palestinian families. They they've chosen and they've made them involuntary martyrs, and they don't want to be martyrs. They're living large in luxury hotels in other nations, but actually the innocent Palestinians are the one that are suffering and dying throughout all this. And Israel is forced to do what they've been doing to get their hostages back home and to dismantle Hamas, so there can ever be a viable path for peace and to rebuild Gaza. And Israel deserves the kind of security with having this as a neighbor.
You say you're all in on Israel. Is the Democratic Party all in on Israel?
I've been disappointed through that for the Democratic Party. I feel like that at times I've disagreed with members of my party throughout all that, but that shouldn't be like the ultimate litmus test. And that's why I push back why some people are, they had the abandoned Biden or the uncommitted kind of voters. And if you're a Democrat, why would you do that kinds of a thing? And that was before the debate. Why would you, who would you vote for? It's absolutely, it's absurd. You are working for Trump, and the one president in history that called for a Muslim ban. And it's a strange place to be right now, that the people that were targeted by Trump, you are effectively voting for them or not voting for Joe Biden, or softening support for Joe Biden.
Final question, Senator. If, as you want, Joe Biden does stay as the presidential nominee, you don't change the nominee. The polling shows consistently Joe Biden trailing Donald Trump, whereas in 2020, he was well ahead of Donald Trump. He's trailing Donald Trump in the national polls in those key 6, 7, 8 states, including your own Pennsylvania. Every poll, every aggregate of polls has Trump up, sometimes as much as 6, 7, 8 points. So if you're not going to change the candidate, how do you change the trajectory of the race between now and November, given the state of the polling?
At some point, we're at the place where that's our candidate, and Joe Biden is that candidate, and we should all be all in on Joe Biden, and we should be working harder, and we should be spending less time arguing or continue to diminish Joe Biden's standing until we could all come together and work against Trump, instead of trying to just get to a place where we've already should be after that. And I'll never understand why my party, when something happens, we panic and start to argue amongst ourselves. And the Republicans, can think of that. Can you imagine in the past if the leader of your party was convicted as a felon, and you showed up and you dressed like him, and you're like, hey, I stand with you, I'm all by you. And it's absolutely it's absurd. It is. And now and like the New York Times, I sent that yesterday. It's like when journalism becomes a vendetta. And now the New York Times has become like open mic night. You dislike Joe Biden, you want Joe to go. Hey, we've got some space for you. It's pathetic.
But I ask you again, Senator, how do you turn the race around? A race which right now Joe Biden seems to be losing.
It won't turn around until we stop around and pretending that Joe Biden isn't going to be our guy. I mean, because he is.
Because I think a lot of Democrats will say that's not changing the trajectory of the race. Just to get behind him when he's losing, that doesn't really change things.
Again, we got to get our together, and we have to have our reality check that Joe Biden is our guy.
Well, you've said it very clearly, and I appreciate it very much, Senator John Fetterman. Thanks very much for joining Free Expression.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for us this week from Free Expression. Thanks very much for joining us. Next week, I'll be at the Republican Convention in Milwaukee, and we'll be keeping you up to date with a conversation with someone, maybe many people there, about President Donald Trump, his pick for vice president, and the future of the Republican Party in this election and beyond. Look forward to speaking to you then. In the meantime, have a great week and goodbye.